Welcome back to the deep dive. We've gathered everything we could find, courtroom reports, legal takes, public reactions, to really get to the heart of today's, well, frankly, explosive developments in the Sean Combs federal case. Our mission, as always, is to cut through that noise, give you a clear picture of what went down, what it actually means, and what might happen next. And the breaking update today: Sean Combs denied bail right after the verdict. It's a turn of events that might be just as significant, maybe even more so, than the verdict itself. Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a lot to explore. So let's dive right into that courtroom drama from earlier, the verdict. I know I was glued to the updates, and the results were, well, they surprised a lot of folks, didn't they?
Oh, absolutely. A real surprise for many.
Combs was found not guilty on what most people saw as the heaviest charges. That's count 1, the racketeering conspiracy, and then 2 counts related to SA counts 2 and 4. But, and this is the crucial part, the jury found him guilty on 2 other counts, counts 3 and 5, both for transportation to engage in prostitution.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here is just how much that specific outcome kind of jolted people, the legal experts,
Yes.
the public watching. It's a major result, especially given how serious those initial charges were.
Yeah.
You know, seeing him acquitted on racketeering and the main SA-related counts, even with those 2 guilty verdicts, is definitely a partial win for his defense team.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, it's not without some very, very serious consequences. It really suggests the jury had to carefully pick through a very complicated set of evidence to land right there. It shows maybe the nuanced picture they formed over those weeks.
And you could feel that shift in the courtroom the moment the verdict came down. Combs himself, right after, he turned to his family, said, "I'm coming home."
Yeah, I saw reports of that.
He even knelt down, looked like he was praying. And his son, Christian, was clearly celebrating, saying things like, "Everybody watching, so happy coming home. God bless the whole world." But here's the real kicker, the irony. Despite those words, that hope, that is not what's happening tonight. Despite that partial victory, Combs is still in custody. And that leads us directly into the truly remarkable development just hours later.
Yeah.
So after what felt like maybe a moment of relief for them, the judge drops this bombshell, no bail, denied. That felt like a massive pivot, didn't it? Especially after that partial win. What was the thinking there? What was the judge's reasoning?
Well, the judge was remarkably direct about it. The core rationale was Combs's, quote, propensity for violence. And the judge specifically mentioned it was, quote, starkly depicted in the now infamous 2016 video at the Intercontinental Hotel.
That video again?
Yes. And it wasn't just a passing reference. The judge stated very clearly, it is impossible for the defendant to demonstrate that he poses no danger to the community. The court pointed to a pattern, a consistent pattern that came out in the trial, of violence and manipulation. And if you connect the dots, I mean, this wasn't a decision made lightly or in a vacuum. The judge sat through 7 weeks of testimony, heard all the evidence, including things the jury didn't see.
Right. That's important.
It gave the judge this unique, comprehensive view of Combs' potential for violence, the things that happened behind closed doors. And that led to the conclusion that, essentially, no conditions, nothing could be put in place to reliably protect the community from him.
Wow. And the defense, they must have pushed back hard, offering money, property.
Oh, absolutely. They offered $1 million, put his homes up as collateral. They argued, look, the conviction itself isn't technically for a crime of violence. But the prosecution, they didn't miss a beat. They went straight back to that 2016 hotel security footage, that footage of Combs attacking Cassie Ventura.
Right.
They made that link explicit, undeniable. It directly countered the defense's point.
Yeah, that footage is hard to argue against in that context.
Then here's where it gets strategically fascinating, almost shocking in a way. It seems the judge actually used the defense's own arguments, their own narrative, against them. Well, in trying to explain the relationship dynamics, maybe frame it as a modern love story or something complex to distance him from trafficking, the defense might have sort of implicitly acknowledged a level of control or even domestic abuse. The judge appeared to take that acknowledgement, that picture of control and harm, and use it as part of the reason to deny bail, basically saying, see, this confirms the potential danger. So for some legal analysts, honestly, the bail denial wasn't a total shock.
Okay.
Because of that history laid bare. As one put it, there was just nothing that he can put in place, no condition to protect the community from Sean Combs, given everything the court now knew.
And Combs's reaction, you could see it change, right?
Yeah. The reports described a real shift. He apparently came into the bail hearing blowing kisses to his family, seemed relatively okay. But when the judge read the decision, refused to release him, he was seen just hanging his head,
Yeah.
genuinely shaken, disappointed,
Yeah.
but very different demeanor.
So what now for the defense on this?
No.
Appeal.
Oh, almost certainly. That's the next logical move.
Yeah.
They'll likely take this straight to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals,
Yeah.
try and get him released pending the sentencing. It's a crucial next step for them.
Okay, let's pivot back to the jury for a moment, because their decisions, especially on those not guilty counts, are really something to dissect. How did they get there? It defied a lot of predictions. What were the finer points?
It's definitely complex. Let's take the racketeering conspiracy charge first. For that, the prosecution had a high bar. They needed to prove not just individual illegal acts, but the existence of a criminal enterprise, like an ongoing organization.
Right.
And an agreement between people within it to commit those specific illegal acts, the predicate acts. Now, yes, he was found guilty on 2 counts of transportation for prostitution, and those are predicate acts. But crucially, the prosecution failed to convince the jury, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Combs's whole operation was an enterprise built on an agreement to do these things. They didn't prove that larger structure or an agreement to commit other alleged acts like arson or kidnapping or bribery that were mentioned, it wasn't enough.
So the structure, the agreement, that was missing.
That seems to be the takeaway, as some experts pointed out. You can't conspire by yourself. Where were the other key players agreeing to this? The lack of testimony from people considered his lieutenants, like KK Christina Quorum or Drock, maybe left a gap there.
Okay, that makes sense. And the SA-related charges, the sex trafficking ones, why not guilty there, especially regarding Cassie and Jane Doe?
That seems to have been particularly tough for the jury. Why? Well, the defense brought in a lot of evidence, text messages, other messages apparently showing these women expressing willingness to participate in certain activities, the hotel meetups, things like that. And frankly, according to analysts, that did leave seeds of doubt for this jury. They found it hard to, walk that fine line. Saying, okay, maybe there was violence in the relationship, but was that violence specifically used to traffic them? Or was it just violence happening within a complicated, maybe abusive relationship?
A very fine line indeed.
Exactly. It's a really difficult distinction for a jury. I talked to one legal expert who was genuinely surprised by the acquittal on those counts. She found Cassie's testimony incredibly powerful, so compelling, so broken, and thought the jury would convict based on that alone.
Wow.
But contrast that with the guilty verdicts, the transportation for prostitution. That seemed much clearer cut.
Yeah.
The evidence involved, 27 escorts mentioned, proof of payment for commercial SMEG acts, proof of transport across state lines, much more direct, less ambiguous for the jury, perhaps.
Stepping away from just the legal points, what was the feeling in the room before the verdict?
Reports described it as incredibly tense, just thick with anticipation. Combs himself, apparently, seemed kind of relaxed at first. Said, "Mom, I love you," was reading from Psalm 11. But then, when that first guilty was read out, an audible gasp from people in the gallery. You could hear it, a real moment of shock.
And then afterwards, when the jury left.
Then the mood apparently flipped entirely among his supporters, described as very celebratory. Lots of hugging, people calling the defense lawyers the dream team. A moment of, relief and maybe perceived victory for them, even if it turned out to be temporary.
And outside, the court of public opinion. That sounded intense.
Oh, incredibly intense and deeply divided. Online, you see everything, people saying he got off easy, others saying justice was served. I heard from Tissa Tells, the YouTube commentator. She was right there in the thick of it.
What did she describe?
She said the immediate reaction from many people outside was just anger, rage, feeling really upset, people thinking the jury dropped the ball. She talked about absolute chaos, pandemonium, and disturbingly actual threats of violence.
Threats.
Against who?
Our followers were asking sharp questions like, how could the jury ignore Cassie's testimony? Or the mother's testimony about the money? Banna being held over a balcony, Capricorn Clark. Just disbelief. But then there were pro-Combs people yelling threats at the media. Awful things like, we're going to beat you worse than Cassie, telling reporters to apologize to Diddy.
That's chilling.
Absolutely chilling. Tissa Tells actually had to hire security. She was escorted out by 2 armed guards because it got so chaotic. The court itself was apparently locked down for a period. Her guards, experienced guys, said they'd never seen anything like it.
Wow.
Just incredible.
Yeah. And her feeling, reflecting maybe a lot of people, was that she'd hoped for a bigger shift, a leap forward for society, but felt this was just a small little motion forward. She emphasized, the work continues for victims and survivors. It really shows that huge gap between a legal verdict and public sentiment,
Yeah.
especially with powerful figures.
So, okay, the verdict's in, bail's denied. The dust is starting to settle just a bit. What's the next big step? Sentencing, right? What does that path forward look like for Sean Combs?
That's right. Sentencing is the next major milestone, and it's currently scheduled for quite a way out, October 3, 2025.
October 3rd.
Before that date, there's a whole process. The probation department conducts what's called a pre-sentencing investigation, or PSI. It's a deep dive into Combs himself, his background, personal traits, mental health, any history of illegal substance use. And here's an interesting point. While he doesn't have a formal criminal record like prior convictions, the judge can, and likely will, consider his criminal history. That means alleged bad acts, things brought up in trial, even if they didn't lead to charges or convictions before.
So past behavior still matters, even without convictions.
It absolutely can in the judge's eyes when determining the sentence. And this leads to the big question. How long will the sentence be? The defense is arguing for something like 21 to 27 months, just under or just over 2 years.
I mean, prosecute.
They're aiming much higher. They believe he should get anywhere from 51 to 63 months. That's what, 4 to 5 years? A pretty significant gap between those two positions.
Yeah, a huge difference. So what arguments will each side make?
Well, the government, the prosecution, they'll argue these weren't just simple prostitution charges. They'll point to the scale, the 27 escorts, the 2 alleged victims from the SA counts, even though he was acquitted, the dozens of flights. They'll definitely bring up the violence as an aggravating factor.
Right, the judge already seemed convinced about the violence potential at the bail hearing.
Exactly. Prosecutors basically said the trial proved he was addicted to illegal substances, a domestic abuser, and a batterer of women. They'll use all of that to push for the higher end.
And the defense, how do they counter that?
They'll focus on mitigating factors. They'll highlight Combs' positive things, his philanthropy, donating millions of dollars to HBCUs, arguing he's been a pillar of society in many ways, trying to paint a broader picture of the man.
So the judge weighs all that, the good, the bad, the ugly.
Precisely. The judge has a lot of discretion. They'll consider things like deterrence. What message does this sentence send? Rehabilitation. What sentence might actually help him change? And, of course, punishment for the crimes he was convicted of. And again, the judge can factor in those bad acts that show his character, his propensity, even without prior convictions. So that phrase holds true. He might not have a criminal record, but the court now has a picture of his criminal history.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Beyond the legal specifics, this whole trial forces us, maybe you the listener too, to re-examine this image of Sean Combs, his fame, his power. How much does something like this fracture that?
It has to, right?
Because the stories we heard, the experiences described by these women, that doesn't just disappear from the public consciousness, regardless of the verdict on certain counts. That image of untouchable success and power has definitely been challenged, if not shattered for many.
And you really have to credit Cassie Ventura's impact here. Her lawyer put out a statement saying Cassie left an indelible mark, not just on entertainment, but on the fight for justice. Her speaking out undeniably gave people the courage to come forward.
Yeah.
We saw that directly it led to a number of other people filing similar lawsuits against Combs. It shows how one person's voice can create ripples, empower others. Her testimony was pivotal in many ways.
And just one last point, a piece of almost unbelievable timing, or maybe crazy legal irony, as one report called it. That sentencing date, October 3, 2025, exactly 30 years before, to the day, October 3, 1995, that was the day O.J. Simpson was found not guilty. Another incredibly divisive, momentous legal event tied to a major celebrity.
Wow, October 3rd. That is quite a coincidence.
And add to that, 30 years ago this summer was the 1995 Source Awards, an event where Combs' presence was a huge factor in that whole East Coast, West Coast hip-hop feud really heating up. It's just strange how these dates seem to echo with significant cultural and legal moments. So as we wrap up this deep dive, it leaves us with some big questions to chew on, doesn't it? What does all this really tell us about accountability when someone is in the public eye, wielding that kind of power and influence? How does a trial like this, with its complex verdict and that shocking bail decision, shift the broader conversation around celebrity, power, and what justice looks like? And maybe what lessons, if any, can we draw from how the jury navigated the evidence and how the judge ultimately decided Combs still posed a danger?
There's always more to learn, always more to understand in these situations.
Indeed. We hope you'll keep thinking about these complex issues, exploring the wider impact of this case long after you're done listening. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.